It's bizarre. It's weird. What is that about?
Welcome back to the Unchained Binge podcast, everybody. My name is Caley Fretz. I am joined for this 6th episode of the 3rd season by, frankly, a rock star cast here at the Unchained Binge podcast. Welcome back to the pod, Jonny Long.
Hello. Well, you say rock star, but that's because the actual movie star from this episode is missing from the recording currently.
Mm-hmm. That is true. We have no Kit Nicholson. Unfortunately, they were not available today, and they feature in the actual episode. We'll get to that later. Dane Cash, welcome.
Hello, Caley. Ready to talk about sprinting?
Sprinters.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yep, it's going to be good. And finally, a new voice for anybody who's only listened to the Unchained pods, but not a new voice for diehard fans of Spin Cycle. Intern Nick, welcome. Welcome back.
Hey, Caley, good to be back. Glad to be the 1,000-watt max sprint person talking about the sprinters.
Yeah, you have zero personal experience in what was happening in today's episode. So episode 6 it's called History Makers. And it's the sprinter episode. And we knew this was coming. It had to be coming, right? Because, well, anybody who follows the sport knows exactly what happened at the Tour last year. We had some historic sprinting going down throughout the Tour de France last year. The first and foremost was the fact that we had the first Black African to win a Tour de France stage, and then he went and won 3 of them. And then the other one was, of course, Mark Cavendish going for the all-time stage win record in 35. And the other sort of sprinters are they're shown in this episode. We get a bit of Jasper Philipsen being really frustrated. We get some of the other ones in there, but really this episode is focused on those two. Which one do you want to start with, Cav, or do you want to start with Binny?
Let's do Binny, because I imagine we're going to have more in the Cav locker.
I think so. So, yeah, what do you guys have to say about this? I mean, I remember I was standing at the finish line of the stage that he won, right? Which is obviously the one that the show focuses on as well, because it's the big emotional moment. It was a chaotic finish. It was one of those finishes where sometimes they keep the fans kind of out of the finish area, and in this one they definitely didn't. I don't know if you remember this, Jonny, but we were sort of like
I do.
like elbowing fans to try to just get access to the riders that we were trying to talk to, and it was complete chaos. And so I actually watched it. I was kind of just impressed that Netflix managed to get the shots that they did, because I could barely get any audio from anybody at Intermarché in that afternoon. It was genuinely, like, I think one of the best moments of the Tour de France that I have personally experienced, because it's pretty rare that you are present for like genuine history, you know? It was really cool.
Yeah. Well, and the same day we had Richard Carapaz get into the yellow jersey, which was the first Ecuadorian to wear, so which is obviously less important or impressive, but it was still cool, because then we just had the press conference were basically double witness in history. So that was cool. The one frustration is that we learned a lot about Biniam Girmay in this episode, which we've not been privy to before, because turns out he's actually far more eloquent than he lets on.
Yep.
That he is. That was my main takeaway, which is of course from a selfish point of view. But he seems like a thoroughly nice man. What I enjoy is that he's so clearly in awe of Mark Cavendish and other guys who he's been watching for years at the Tour.
Yeah.
And that comes across in a really authentic way, I think. Because I imagine trying to watch the Tour in Eritrea is also hard, very hard. So that was cool. Yeah, it was just great. I'd love to have seen more in Eritrea. I imagine it's probably quite hard to film there, or I've got a crew over there to do loads of filming.
Yeah, I mean, well, what wasn't mentioned anywhere in the show was the sort of political / social / the fact that it's like right near the bottom on the list of press freedoms, for example. Yeah. It's like it's not a free and open country. We'll put it that way. No. There's a lot of issues there, and obviously they don't touch on those at all in this show, and I'm not really that surprised. Generally, we don't touch on them much anyway. who can talk a little bit about this sort of like rise of African cycling in the last couple of years? Because Binny is obviously he's like sort of the biggest name that has come out of the sport. There's been a couple others, and Eritrea in particular has produced a lot of really top riders. I mean, Daniel Tekla-Hamanat was the one previously who ended up in the polka dot jersey at the Tour de France, and that was massive. That was sort of like the previous most massive African experience at the Tour.
Yeah, and Girmay's wins last year, and actually over the last couple of years, are substantially more of a big deal. And it already, like you said, already felt like a big deal when Tekla-Hamanat took the King of the Mountains jersey. So we had this stretch there where there were a handful of Eritrean riders, other black Africans as well, not just Eritrean riders, but the Eritreans were the ones who were really kind of punching above their weight in terms of just population size of the country. So yeah, there were others, Nathaniel Berhane, a handful of others, but they kind of came up and were racing at the World Tour level as of late 2000s, early 2010s. But there wasn't a lot of winning. You know, they were there in the peloton, and that in and of itself was a big deal because it was a relatively new thing, and the fact that there were a handful of them was a pretty big deal. You had a team that was specifically focused on African riders. The team variously known throughout the years, MT and Quebeca, they became Dimension Data, and they had this focus on having at least a certain amount of their riders being African, and then they would also sort of bring in others to sort of have other reasons to be in races. I mean, they ended up having Mark Cavendish on the team, who's the rider we're going to talk about a lot later today. But again, they are bringing a lot of African riders up into the World Tour ranks. At the same time, there really wasn't that much actual success. Winning was not something that was happening that much with those riders. So they were there, and that in and of itself was a big story. Girmay's story has been a pretty significant development on that. And actually, I feel like it kind of came at a time when some of that initial groundswell seemed to have faded a little bit. Mm-hmm. But then Girmay comes up. They sort of explained it in the show, his development, his evolution into the top ranks. You suddenly get this promising rider. Even then, though, it didn't seem to me that there was this sense that he's gonna win a Grand Tour stage. He's gonna become the first black winner of a Tour stage, which is what he became. That you didn't get that sense right away in his career, and then it just happened. He kind of ended up sort of first breaking that barrier at the Giro, and then to do it at the Tour de France again. Like Tekla-Hamanat wearing a jersey, just wearing a jersey that he didn't ultimately win, by the way. That was a big story. This is so much bigger. This is a rider. It's the first black Tour de France stage winner. Like, full stop. That's huge.
Ever in the history, in 100+ years of the Tour de France.
And I thought it was, I've been kind of waiting for this episode because it was one of the biggest stories of the Tour last year.
Yeah.
And so that was great. I do kind of, I feel like they could have done a little bit more to make it clear how big of a deal this is.
I think there's some Netflix obviously wants to present a nice, uncontroversial story, right? And documentary series, because the main reason why we haven't had the number of black African riders that we probably should based on talent alone is obviously sporting development pathways just trickier overall because it's miles away. There's not the structure that exists there, and the other big issue is visas, where for a European team to recruit an up-and-coming African rider as opposed to a European rider, there's just so many more obstacles in the way. And so that is one of the biggest hurdles, which makes Biniam Girmay even making it to a European team, let alone winning stages in green jersey, even more impressive.
Yeah, I mean, you can just look at the peloton and see. Like, the of the 200 riders in any given race, you might have a handful of black riders, maybe. Many races, I think there are none at all.
No, the majority probably, yeah.
It's a pretty big deal to even have a black rider in a race. And that includes, by the way, it's not just African riders. Obviously, there are plenty of black Americans, but they're not at the Tour de France. So Girmay, the first one to win a stage, is just a huge deal. And he pointed out, I think, he did say at one point, he kind of mentioned that fact. Just that, generally speaking, that the Tour peloton, the cycling world in general, is white, and the vast majority of the riders are white. The vast majority of the staff is white. Yeah. Caley, you're muted.
Sorry, I was turning off because the train was going by. He said it straight up. He said that the sport that he had previously he had once believed that it was only for European athletes or only for white people. That's a direct quote, right? And so it's the classic: you can't be what you can't see, right? Representation in at the highest levels of the sport is really, really important. And so, yeah, that's why it was huge. I mean, you saw his teammate grab him by the head and be like, "You just made history," and all those sort of moments.
That was
right?
quite weird.
Yeah, that was a bit excessive, maybe.
Yeah.
But also,
But still.
again, that sort of finish area was chaotic and loud, and I think that within the context of what was going on,
I think
it's probably
you're right.
a bit less. I try not to
Yeah.
grab people by the head and yell in their face, but I think it made more sense in that particular particular moment. Very briefly before we move on to Cav, I do think it's worth mentioning the fact, and Dane, you kind of alluded to this already, how surprising his Tour de France ride was, right? Like, if you made a list of the sprinters that were going to win 3 stages at last year's Tour de France, he would not have been on it. 4 stages at last year's Tour de
No,
France.
3. Sorry, 3. Fuck.
Yeah, see? 3 stages he wouldn't have been on it, right? You got Philipsen, Groenewegen, like all the guys who have done this before. And if you look at his results in the lead up to the Tour de France last year, there's nothing to suggest that he's going to be the dominant sprinter of the Tour. We always talk about there's like a sprinter of the year, a sprinter of the Tour every year, and they kind of allude to this in the show, and the fact that sprinting is so confidence based and so mental that if you get that first one, you can do it and you keep doing it. And so we tend to have this thing where sprinters, they'll win one, and then if you win one, you win 3, right? But no one was expecting that. And even coming into this coming year, right? We're 10, 15 days out of the 2025 Tour. Girmay is slated to race again. He's done very little this spring to suggest that he is going to be the dominant sprinter of the Tour de France, but I think he still could be, right? I think it's entirely possible.
I feel like the actual racing angle, just racing analysis, has been very light, and they didn't really go into that. But last year at the Tour, I think when the first stage win happened, it felt like an anomaly. Oh, wow, he won this stage because XYZ happened, and that's awesome that we had this history-making moment.
Because Philipsen fell down, right? That was the sort of,
And then it was he won a second stage, and you're like, wow, okay, he's got it. And then he won a third stage in the green jersey. There's a lot more to that than just luck or random circumstance. So clearly he was on form. His team, which is a team that doesn't do a lot, by the way, actually managed to pull off this huge result.
Wasn't it? I think it was Intermarché's first Tour win.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, they kind of made it. They actually did kind of make a joke of that. They said, we've been coming here for 7 years trying to win a stage, and we say that at every press conference, but it's never actually happened or whatever. Anyway, it was a big deal, and I feel like they could have gone a little bit more into the fact that Girmay really kind of dominated the sprints. It was something else. It wasn't just the history-making thing. It was also he was really good.
Well, he was so good that it became boring by the end, which is the true marker of
as
when a
sprints often
sprinter's
do.
really on form. But to be oh, they won again, great.
Yeah.
So I guess my question then is, he's slated to race this year. What are we going to be surprised if he wins the green jersey again, or
I would be.
No, I wouldn't be.
No.
I think this is the thing. Again, if you look at the results in the lead up last year, you wouldn't have pegged him as a favorite for that. Not even close, right? And the same this year. He's got a bunch of he got 8th at some random Belgian race in April. That's kind of all he's done. But apparently, very, very good at peaking when he needs to peak. And crucially, there's not that many teams that are fully built around a sprinter anymore, right? We saw this in episode 3 with the AG2R thing, where you've got Sam Bennett trying to split a team with Felix Gall, and so he doesn't actually have that many lead-out riders. And when you don't have that many lead-out riders, it makes it exponentially harder to get done what you need to get done. Intermarché, I would imagine, are going to show up built around Binny again this summer.
One of the few teams that will be like that because
it'll be them.
sprint
It'll
stages.
be Alpecin with Philipsen, and that's still going to be the dominant team because anytime you've got Mathieu van der Poel as your lead-out man, you're in a good race at that point. Like, who else is really going to be? Because Astana won't be built
they
around a
won't
single
be.
sprinter like they were last year. We'll get to that in a second.
Little Trek maybe, because some of their GC guys are not necessarily at the form or shape they could. But that's
and we've got Jonathan Milan coming to the tour for the first time. But anyway, point being is that I still wouldn't put. I would put him in the group that it is possible, but I would still say that Philipsen is the hot favorite for the green jersey this year.
Can we touch on the Biniam Jasper like dichotomy that this episode presented, where like Biniam was like every win a little more ecstatic, but in his very like subtle coy way, and then Jasper is in this clockwork orange descent into madness that they show.
I actually really appreciate Jasper Philipsen from the I feel like most of this show, not just this season, in general, he really adds a lot to the Netflix show. Like his emotions are on the screen a lot, and I appreciate that. It's what you want out of. I mean, docu-series. Yeah, it's kind of reality TV though. So.
Well, and I think of any nationality, the Belgians are the least likely to go along with any sort of scripted reality-based format. Like,
it's true,
and you see that because they're either like saying nothing, being like, "Why are you filming this?" or you are seeing Jasper Philipsen crying on the bus, which felt a bit wrong, to be honest.
It
could seem like checking around.
The least understanding of the assignment is the Belgian group.
Generally. But he
Yeah.
understood it just naturally. He's just giving us. It's not like Jonathan Vaughters, who is really good at giving us staged conversations. By the way, we'll maybe get into that at some point.
When we get to episode 7, we're gonna get a lot of JV. Once again telling us that if they don't win a stage,
it's all over.
Everything is going to collapse.
You brought up decathlon, Caley. I just really wanted to quickly say, not to bring the mood down, but I could have done without that decathlon episode and had just more of the various dynamics going on in this episode in the time spent watching decathlon not do anything.
Yes. I think we're all in agreement there. If you were French, maybe you'd feel differently, Dane.
Maybe.
But should we switch over to Cav?
The one thing I would say, no, let's go to Cav, because then there's let's go what's the word in the time that things happened? What's that word? I can't remember.
Okay, so we spent a bunch of time with Binny in the beginning of the race. It was a genuine incredible moment. Loved it. I think most people would say that the next bit we're going to talk about was another genuinely incredible moment. Most people. We were primarily concerned with the fox that was smushed on the ground. I think
that's on the list. Don't worry.
Yeah. Anyway, so the next storyline here is the Mark Cavendish storyline, and for those they get into most of the sort of details here. We've got a rider who was unquestionably the best sprinter. He's the best sprinter ever. Like that's very clear. I think you can apply that to him. He was the dominant sprinter for a number of years, but he also, over the course of quite a long career, definitely blew hot and cold, right? So like he would just win every single sprint in a Tour de France for 3 years running, and then he would win absolutely nothing for 2 years, and then he would come back and he would spend another 3 years winning all the Tour sprints, and then he would disappear again. Yeah. And a lot of this was like he had like a viral.
Epstein-Barr virus?
Epstein-Barr, I believe. And so that kind of came and went. He's had some injuries and things like that. So a lot of the sort of like low points in his career were these things. But my point with that is that this is a rider who has come back 3 or 4 times already since he started winning in 2000. Is it 8 or 9?
2008.
2008. Nick knows.
Biniam actually misspoke too.
How old was Intern Nick in 2008?
That's why I immediately was thinking
9.
All right, don't tell me that. I started covering this sport like a year after that. Anyway, so we've got a rider who's come back. He's an interesting character. He's a loud character. He's like a classic sprinter who is willing to like talk shit in the press conferences, and in particular had a really contentious relationship with a lot of the media. He's been incredibly rude to me, to Jonny, to lots of other people that
everyone
cover the
we
sport.
know.
Pretty much everybody we know at various
He
points.
would say that we were rude, but I would
say we're
challenge
rude.
that based on the definition of like the English language.
Yeah, I think as a person, he is portrayed in a very kind light.
As he is all the time.
As he is all the time.
Especially in the British press.
In the British press, like he is, because he is a phenomenal athlete. and deserves full credit for overcoming the things he's overcome. I mean, some of the other backstory here is like back in the day, British Cycling, which is the entity that has brought a lot of these British riders up, particularly in that era, they were coming sort of through the track and into road racing, and there was this pathway that was funded by I think it was your lottery money, right?
Yeah.
And for a while, British Cycling was the country for professional cycling, and Cav early on was like shoved aside from this particular program. Like he was not kicked out, but like not seen as a world-class talent when he was like in his junior years and things like that, and had to kind of forge his own way. And so anyway, again, a rider who has overcome, and managed to become the best sprinter ever. He's trying to. Did they even mention whose record he's trying to beat? Did they even mention Eddie
I
Merckx?
think once.
Anyway, so he's trying to overtake the stage win record of Eddie Merckx, who's already tied at 34. Eddie Merckx is the greatest of all time, the GOAT. And so overtaking him in any sort of record is an impressive feat. And then we get to the actual day of, right?
Yeah.
And we see him, or I say race of, I should say. We see him fail, I think once or twice. And then everything starts to kind of come together. They've built this team around him. He's got Mark Renshaw, who was his old lead-out guy back at like the HTC. When he was winning like everything,
He was the guy.
the director sportif at Astana used to be his lead-out guy. And so they're like back paired up. All the ingredients are there. They've got the whole family there at every single one of these stages. And he finally does it. Did you feel just a wave of patriotism, Johnny, when he crossed the line once
I was
again?
definitely happy for him. I think it was because it's impressive to see the thing that I'm definitely a Cav detractor on the whole, but that doesn't mean you can't respect an athlete's achievement.
Yeah.
And it is the comeback every time when everyone said he can't do it, which is what makes it all the more impressive when everyone counts him out, including our very own Kit Nicholson, whose voice appeared building up to this whole crescendo of Cav actually doing it, which was great. I enjoyed Spin Cycle Podcast being in quotation marks, as if it's like the Spin Cycle Podcast, if that's a thing.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That was enjoyable. So yeah, we have now been in the Netflix Unchained series in more than just like, I think I've spotted myself, and I think I spotted you, Johnny, in the background.
But the name, okay, we had
we actually had
a company name, a brand name.
Yeah,
on
so
screen
our
forever.
podcast is in this episode. Should we tell that story, or are we saving that story for After Dark?
Let's do it for After Dark. That's a good.
Okay, there's a
Good
bit of a
tease.
backstory in how this ended up in the show. But anyway, we can talk about what it actually was, which is Kit said something to the effect of, I'd love to see him do it, but I don't
not gonna
think
do
he
it."
can. Right?
Yeah.
And they used this as setup for then him doing it. So basically, they used Kit to prove them wrong, right?
I'm glad they used Kit, and they also used Lantern Rouge a bit as well, right after. And I, in this instance, appreciated that they used trusted media voices rather than the 2025 version of the Vox Pop, because we've seen a lot this year. I don't remember this happening before. Just like tweets or whatever the heck you call them on X now, all
In
over the
French.
place.
They're
All just
definitely
random
fake.
French tweets.
And I'm
Definitely
like,
think
fake
they're real.
tweets. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're not. They're obviously not, because otherwise they'd show like a little icon or like the name.
well, they blur the name out. They don't want you to
It's
see who's saying.
bizarre. It's weird.
I don't think it's
What is
real.
that about?
In any case, I don't care what random people are saying. I don't care when
No.
when the news shows me the Vox Pop. I don't care. Vox Populi for those who like,
You can find
man
a
on the
tweet that
street.
says anything about any topic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But
Because people are
if
infinitely
Nicholson
stupid.
says it, then I'm like, okay, well, there's some authority there. You know.
Speaking of which, there is a few things that Mark Cavendish says, and that then give us context to other things he said, which I would like to point out, where he speaks these as like facts or whatever, and it just contradicts it. Like, you know, there's a sort of, you know, it's like when JFK started doing the gap in terms of like what he says and what's reality, right? And then that's how politics has eventually got to this point. Anyway, when Mark Cavendish says the tour is the only bike race in the world that gets me emotional, believe that's true, but then didn't need the whole song and dance a few months later when he was celebrating the end of his career with a win at the Singapore Tour de France Criterium, where there was the whole like emotional display there. So that, and we knew that at the time, but it's just like, come on. The next quote was, "Of course I'm going for the record." We weren't allowed to talk about the record for the 5 years leading up to, no, even before when he was trying to equal it, we weren't allowed to ask about it. He would.
You should clarify what you mean by that. Is that he wouldn't talk like
he
would act
in
like
press moments or in interviews.
Oh no, I don't want to talk about it. Yeah.
He'd be like, why are you asking me that? It's like, what do you mean, why am I asking you that? That's like literally the only reason that anyone's talking to you.
Yeah.
So he would like stare daggers at you. He would talk into the mic really, really quietly so that your microphone wouldn't pick up what he was saying. It was the most infuriating thing in the world. And all of this boils down to maybe Mark Cavendish should win Understanding the Assignment Award because he's understood it for years. He's made this all into a huge marketing thing that he has then cultivated and kept for himself for when he's actually doing it. He doesn't want to be giving out the quotes and talking about it until he can do it, with a Netflix, with books, with all this other stuff. So kind of fair enough, but at the same time, could deal without the full-on marketing blitz of every waking public moment of Mark Cavendish's life.
I think the show really gave you a sense of the dichotomy of Cavendish, where, you said this earlier, that he's been quite unpleasant with the media for a while. There have been instances where we've been extremely frustrated by things he's done, or he's been extremely frustrated on camera with people around him in ways that are kind of not acceptable professionally. Like, I don't know. I don't.
When he had to go at that mechanic,
like screaming at his mechanic.
And, I've never had that kind of interaction with anyone at Escape. I don't think that would. I think that'd be frowned upon by my boss. But Cav kind of gets away with it because he's the best sprinter ever.
Yeah.
However, on the other side of that coin, he's extremely charismatic. When he wants to be. When he's in a good mood, he's great for a quote. And you got to see with his family. I thought the interactions you saw with his family were very pleasant and fun to get a sense of his inner life and all that good stuff. And I think you saw both sides of Cav there. He can be infuriating, but he can also be likable in a way.
Yeah, I loved his little, like, when he would be on FaceTime with his daughters in, like, baby voice after it's just, like, the chaos of a sprint. And then he's like, oh, I miss you so much. Like,
I kind of did like that, but it also kind of made me feel a bit, I don't know, because you're just not used to seeing him in that way.
No.
Do you think he was actually on FaceTime, or did they make him do that?
They might have made him call. But I mean, speaking as a parent, you switch into kid mode pretty quickly when they ring you up.
I would also like to mention I really liked how they portray PETA and him, where PETA is a ride or die.
Oh yeah,
right. Like she's ready to fight someone.
She's the brains behind the operation, though.
Yeah,
she's
pulling the strings.
She does all the 100%.
Yeah,
I love how the Cavendish family, which has many children. There are children of all ages in the Cavendish family. From a very young age, they learn not to filter themselves.
Oh yeah.
Cav and PETA, and I think I heard one of the teens dropping some F-bombs, like around the 2 and 3 year old or whatever, however old they are.
That's just being British, mate.
I have a quote in my notes. I like PETA, and the quote is, can I swear on this?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I like PETA. The quote is, who gives a fuck about the comeback? From that, it was like 90 seconds into the episode, I was like, I'm Team PETA. Let's go.
What I would say, as well as basically managing the business and carting these children around France, because they are sometimes Cav's agent will be with the family. I'm not sure if they have separate cars or they're in one, but I'm pretty sure it's Peter and the kids in like some minivan hurtling down.
There's a bit of the episode where we actually get like a rundown of their daily logistics, which
sounds
I thought
horrific.
It was just an interesting piece to like. I mean, my response was like, I don't really care how far you drove today. Like it felt.
I mean, you can't say this because we spend all of July at the Tour de France
complaining about
on the
how
podcast.
That is very true. That is very true. No, but like that moment, I know the purpose of it was to like show how dedicated the family was or whatever. But like, it was actually quite a long grab. And like I was just sitting, I was like, this is taking me out of the story actually, because I don't actually care how far you drove.
Maybe that hits a little harder when you're not an American and you don't drive 230 kilometers.
Yeah, exactly. To normal people,
a day trip.
Yeah.
The other thing I will say is I've been at numerous bike races with the Cavendish family. Those children are the best behaved children I have ever witnessed ever.
I thought that while watching them. Yeah.
It's like I think it was at the Tour of Britain one year in Scotland. Anyway, it was definitely up there, and there's like a minute silence for some memorial thing, and all of the children, obviously this was a few years ago, so they were much younger. They all did the minute silence, not even like running, like even like messing around. So it was incredible. That was the time when I was like, they are, you know, not necessarily like Cav's not all that bad, but it's just like, you know, there is definitely, it proved that there's two Cavendishes, right? There is Cavendish, the brand, and the guy, the racer, and the guy who always has to wear that Monster Energy baseball cap. And then there's Cavendish, who's just, I believe him when he says, you know, I need to be at home with my family, and that's where, you know, I could be me and all that stuff.
Yeah.
This is what, but that storytelling with the Cavendish story is what I wanted from the rest of the series. That's how you get to know these characters. Maybe it's a case of them not opening up in the same way that Cavendish and Peter feel able to. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you look at it sort of cynically, I think that Cavendish and Peter have come to a conclusion that this behooves them, that it benefits them to be able to tell their story in this way. It's a relatively safe place to be able to tell the story, right? Because part of the you know, we mentioned a couple times the sort of long-standing back and forth with the media that Cav has had, and part of that is just because like I very much understand it in a lot of ways, because particularly in the sort of 20 teens when British cycling was huge and when all the like regular newspapers were showing up to the Tour de France and all these things, you know, he was ripped to shreds in the media on a regular basis, right? And sometimes fairly, often unfairly. And so I think at some point you don't trust the media around you, and particularly cycling media, to like tell your story properly. Like he just doesn't trust us to do that anymore. Whereas Netflix, I think he probably felt like, I have some measure of control over this. Like I know what I can say into the camera. I'm like you said, Dane, he's a charismatic guy. He can kind of turn on the charm. He knew that he could get out of this series what he needed to get out of it.
Another great example of that is after he beat the record and finished the tour, the very next, like within a couple of days, he was on the Good Morning Britain sofa, which is like equivalent of like your guys' Wake Up America, I think maybe, where it's like fluffy chat show in the morning, and the presenters there were asking him all these annoying questions that we basically would ask him, and he would have a go at us. But obviously, because he's on like live national television, and he just had to sit there and just vibrate because he wasn't allowed to say what he wanted. So that was good fun. The one weird thing is that when they were going into the sprint, Mark Renshaw, the one he won, Mark Renshaw over the radio was like, "Oh, you know, think of your," I think it was the youngest child. Yeah. Do you, you know, think of them? And it's like, do you really want to be thinking about like your infant child when you're literally about to do something incredibly dangerous, after you've already expressed at the start of the episode in the first Tour de France sprint back how terrified you were of it? That seemed very odd.
I liked little nugget that Renshaw and the team car had no idea he won for a while.
Yes,
that was great.
Good.
I didn't know that.
I had no idea that was the case, and it's probably more common than we generally think. Like they completely lost radio contact for a little bit, because not only did they get radio from the riders, but there's race radio, which we occasionally hear. We see Seb Piquet saying things into that. Like that's actually how it works. There's literally a guy in a car who is on the race radio talking to every single one of the teams at the same time, saying this is what just happened, Felix Gall just got dropped, etc., etc. And they lost even that contact. That was a fun little bit.
Well, because then, do you remember that Mark Renshaw's car did turn up late to the team bus? I think because we were all rushed there ready for Cav to eventually arrive, and then obviously, you know, it's fun seeing them congratulate each other. But as we alluded to earlier, the big story of the day, which we covered on our website at the time, was that while history was being made, the Astana bus, when it had pulled up to this strip of land by the finish line, had run over a fox. And there was this fresh, decaying carcass in 2D just amongst the media scrum. And like some people
were
had like
standing on it.
People were standing on it without knowing.
Corrections corner. It didn't kill the fox. The Astana bus didn't kill the fox.
Okay. Sorry.
It came upon it
had been killed that day.
But
or the day before.
But it was,
and it looked like it was. It looked like the Astana bus, like the position of the fox made it look like Astana bus reverses in, fox.
I think there was probably a fox carcass on the road, and the Astana bus flattened it.
That's what I would think.
Yeah, but it was
great because it was a horrible
new enough
smell.
To be juicy, old enough to be stinky.
And he knew it was something bad because usually there's like a low level of like hum around some of our older male colleagues, like 50-year-olds who don't personal hygiene maybe never happened for them, but this was so bad that it was like, what is that? Suddenly realised on the floor, but then other people didn't. So there's like people carrying around boom mics, just like reversing their feet into the fox, and then obviously carrying it on their trainers. It was quite something to watch. It was great entertainment while waiting for Mark Cavendish to arrive.
Can we touch on 2 conspiracy theories out of the back of the sprint too?
Yes, because we actually had a resolution to one of them.
Did we?
Yeah. Do you? Okay.
Right.
I'll get mine out of the way first because I've been.
Yeah, you go ahead first.
So immediately, I think after the stage, from watching the sprint, 'cause it was a weird sprint. It was a very odd sprint, and we were like, and immediately, I don't know why I jumped to this. Probably says a lot about me. I was like, did they kind of, Tour de France rigged? Did they make sure this happened? Did they pay off Jasper Philipsen to not come around Cavendish and let it be done so that Cavendish can stop coming to the Tour, and it's a great marketing opportunity, blah, 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 blah. But then we heard Jasper Philipsen, we saw his reaction first of all, and then we heard him be like in the bus being like, I'm so slow, I don't know what's going on. So because we know how fast Jasper Philipsen can be, it did look like he was not soft pedaling, but not coming out of Cavendish's slipstream to even challenge for the sprint.
Yep.
Just it looked more Singapore criterion than Tour de France. But glad to put that to bed, and I retract. I disavow myself.
I partially disavow that concept, which I don't think that. I think Philipsen wanted to win that stage, and definitely did not gift anything. There's sort of 2 or 3 other sprinters behind Cav who looked. Christoph in particular, like took his hand off the bars before they even got to the finish line. Was like practically clapping for him, right? Like there was still a little bit of that. There's still a little bit of that. But no, the other. So that we can kind of shelve that conspiracy theory. I think that's probably not legit. But the other one is this. He should have been relegated.
Oh yeah,
like he should have been relegated.
What no one was allowed to say. No one was allowed to say at the time.
No one was allowed to say this out loud, right? So, but like the at this tour in particular, the commissaires, the jury, which relegates sprinters pretty regularly for something that. So basically, you're not supposed to shift your lane when you open your sprint, right? You're not supposed to cut people off, basically. And there's no lines in the road, and so like it's not formalized to that extent.
Yeah.
But the rule is basically like if you swing over and like you call it closing the door on somebody,
or even just don't barge people.
Yeah, that is a
space.
Relegatable offense. And at this particular tour, the jury had been sticklers about this. They were trying to make examples of sprinters, right? We had a couple relegations already. This has been happening for a year or 2 already. And then we have, in the biggest sprint, the biggest, most important sprint for the Tour de France of the last couple decades, right? The guy that wins it, the guy that takes the record, swung literally all the way from one side of the road, all the way to the other side of the road, takes Philipsen with him, and then causes a crash right behind him.
Yeah.
Like this is the only defense you could have, and I kind of see this, and like I actually don't think you should be relegated for what he had, and mostly because he was far enough ahead of the group behind him.
Yeah, he was
that he wasn't directly crossing wheels. The only issue is that they had relegated for basically the exact same thing previously in the race.
Yeah,
and the reason is because you don't know how far behind the riders behind you are, right?
It's the action, not the outcome.
It's the action, not the outcome. And the UCI has routinely penalized outcomes, not actions, and so it's not that surprising that this is where we ended up. But I hadn't actually had this thought in my head since last year, and then I was watching the show, and they show the sprint again, and the second I saw it, I was like, oh right, you should have had that taken away.
Well, even when he was fighting in the lead out, when someone was trying to nick his wheel, and he just absolutely barges, which you're allowed to do back in the day, but not anymore. And so that was in this, maybe it was before the new rules maybe came in and the yellow card system sort of thing.
Yep.
So maybe it's hard to remember because obviously there are so many sprints and so many things that go on. But yeah, do you think he knew? I reckon he probably he's a smart racer, so he probably knew he could act however he wants.
He could do whatever the hell he wants.
And if he crossed the line first, it's done. So you kind of respect for playing the man, not the ball.
I think the only thing that would have got him relegated in that sprint is if he took a hand off his handlebars and grabbed another rider and shoved him to the side. I think that's the only thing. Like, it would have had to been that obvious to get him relegated out of the front of that, out of that win. Yeah, it's just, I mean, who cares, right? Like, like I said, frankly, my personal opinion of the way that the jury has been dealing with relegations is I think they were super heavy-handed last year. They were relegating riders for stuff that like is just part of sprinting. So I personally I'm on team don't relegate him. But again, it was a deep and obvious inconsistency with the way that they'd been operating in the previous 2 weeks.
Nick, what are your thoughts on the whole Cavendish industrial complex? Is it something that speaks to you, or does it come across maybe a bit disingenuous?
I would say I am pretty partial towards Cav because he was kind of my first introduction to cycling. He started winning before I really was racing and really got into the sport. So I think like there was a little bit of like, this is back when the tour was still on Versus maybe. Do you remember? Oh yeah.
Kicking it old school.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I remember watching it and being like,
Outdoor Life Network.
Oh yeah. OLN. So I'm pretty partial. I think I like him. I think this episode made me like him more. I think
that's legit.
I haven't had the bad personal interactions that y'all have.
Yeah.
So
we get yelled at pretty frequently because whenever we do a Cav episode, we kind of can't hide our personal views of him, and that's just is what it is.
But I also think that a lot of fans feel the way that Nick just said. Like that, I think that's
totally.
You're allowed to feel everyone's allowed to feel all the ways about him. I was pumped when he won, but what a better athlete than person. And he's an incredible athlete, so you could still be like one of the best people in the world, but you're still not as good a person as you are an athlete.
I will say the monster hat I'm not a fan of. The second note in my notebook is monster hat is jarring. That belongs in motocross, not the Tour de France.
Yeah.
Agreed. And that was jarring.
Agreed. Yeah.
That's my only slight.
Get a Red Bull hat on there. Come on.
Yeah, come on.
Do we find it weird that they didn't end the episode with the triumphant crescendo of Cavendish beating the record? Then we went back and got some extra Binny wins. And then we also are we going to return to the fact that Philipsen did win 2 stages later in the series? Surely we do, because otherwise it's weird to frame it as like, him crying is the last we see. Because actually, by the time they get to Nice, he's won 2 stages. Tour's fine.
Yeah.
So bit odd.
But there's lots of riders that win stages in the store that never show up in Netflix. So.
But they also don't get shown like crying, like sobbing on the bus and kicking doors and
True.
I think my take is that they have bad vibes because everyone has a high fade. Everyone on that team bus is like wearing all black and has a high fade, and every shot is like not good things.
It's because they got the Alpecin barber who's on site with this little trailer who does cuts everyone's hair, and then they have to do a little interview and they get a free haircut. Because as we've just established.
I think I saw one piece of hair on the side of a head that was longer than a 3, maybe once on that bus.
Is the fade not big out west? Because it's still got its grips on Europe and the UK, I would say.
I'm not going to speak to fashion.
I mean, until very recently, you had long, luscious locks. You'd have been perfect on the Alpecin de Koenig team.
I did, but I'm also wearing a cheetah print hat, so fashion's not my forte.
I feel like the producers. UAE's like the chief antagonist, but I do feel like they kind of made Alpecin kind of like a side quest bad guy a little bit. Yeah. They showed us Van der Poel and Philipsen, and I felt like they were kind of contrasting them to the other riders in the race, like these big bad Belgian boys, well, Dutch in the case of Van der Poel. And yeah, it's weird. I don't really think of Alpecin that way. I mean, they're kind of a upstart team who's done a lot to become one of the best teams, but like I don't think of them like some kind of.
I don't really think of them at all, to be honest.
Ooh, yeah, the madman quote, yeah,
Don Draper style.
Yeah.
Well, apart from Philipsen and Van der Poel, it's like.
Yeah, I mean those are their 2 guys, right?
Yeah.
They don't really do much else.
Anyway.
Caden Groves and Shambles. Sorry, Caden Groves.
Totally true. Yeah.
I feel like we've got a few more things to unload in After Dark.
Yeah. Let's head into the trust tree.
There needs to be said in the trust tree. Yeah.
The trust tree of After Dark. So yeah, if you are a member and you're on the member feed, keep listening, and we'll explain how Kit ended up in Unchained
and a bit more
couple
Cav.
other things, and a little more Cav. We'll try to keep it. We'll keep it neutral on Cav, right?
I've got a pointed observation to make,
All right, cool.
but it has, yeah.
If you are not a member, well, that's the end of the episode for you. Sorry. We'll be back with episode 7 in a bit. Actually, it's probably already out, so you can go listen to it whenever you want. If you would like to get access to After Dark, if you'd like to get access to all of our content for all of the Tour de France in July, head to escapecollective.com/join. Sign up now. All right, let's head to After Dark.